Okay, for those people who always wanted to know, how do you build a V12 based on a CBX engine? It's really pretty simple. First, you start out with a stack of CBX engines. Let me see, I gave 4 of them to Andreas. And Andreas, how many CBX engines did you have before I gave you 4? Maybe at least 3. How many did it take you to do the original crank and everything? Anyway, he went through quite a few CBX engines. And you take the engine and you cut it away from the gearbox. You can see where he cut it away right there. And then he took the engine case and laid it down to where the cylinder was going forward at an incline of 10 degrees. And then he machined a billet plate to go underneath the rear cylinder that the rear cylinder sat on. Now the rear cylinder was turned around 180 degrees so you could put the intakes between the cylinders and the exhaust coming out the back. So with the intake coming between the cylinders, he did it at a 72 degree V, even though a 60 Oreo, no talking, a 60 degree V is ideal. He went with 72 degrees to make room for the intakes, as you can see them right there. And because the base plate at 60 degrees, there was not enough room to mount the base plate to the engine case and bolt everything together. Now, if you machine your own engine block out of billet and fuel inject it, you might be able to go with 60 degrees. The ideal configuration for a V12 is 60 degrees. So now the rear cylinder is turning backwards. So the cam chain tensioners are no good. You have to manufacture new cam chain tensioners that go on the opposite side of the cylinder. That's not much of a problem, and the one up on the head has to go up on the valve cover instead of below it. So once you get all of that done, you have to put a second sprocket on the crank for the second cam chain. Otherwise, you're going to run a 4-foot plus long cam chain with an idler between them going to both cylinders, which isn't very functional. So you have to put a second sprocket on the crank. To put that sprocket on the crank, Andreas found a crank that had a cam chain sprocket on the crank that had 2 more teeth than stock. He wanted to go with more teeth because if he took a CBX crank and cut the gear out and then machined a hole in the middle and trimmed down the CBX crank to weld it to it after he cut the gear in half. Did you go with 2 pieces or 3 pieces on the gear, Andreas? Hello? Oh. On the gear you put on the crank, did you go with 2 pieces or did you cut it into 3 pieces for the sprocket?
2 sprockets on the crank.
Okay, the sprocket you cut into 2 pieces. Then he cleaned up the crank where it went, machined it down just a little bit to get a nice smooth surface, and welded the gear to the crank. So now you have 3 sprockets on the crank, 1 for the Hi-Vo chain and 2 of them for each cam chain. So the one that was a little larger diameter, he had to get sprockets to go on the cam that had 4 more teeth to keep a 2-to-1 ratio between the crank and the cam. And so he had to make room for all of those to fit. Not that difficult. And he only went through maybe a dozen pristine cam chain tensioners to get before he finally got everything to work. So all you people that have CBXs whose engines rattle because it needs cam chain tensioners, and Honda doesn't make them anymore, so you cannot get your engine running quiet. Andreas went through at least a dozen cam chain tensioners, good ones, before he finally had a functional set that worked pretty decent. Otherwise, everything works pretty good. On the, what else did he do? Well, it's the Hyvo chain is, the tensioner on that is activated off the oil pressure, so we had to modify that and make a longer chain to go on it. The cam chains, he had to make his own cam chains. I think he used cam chains from a Yamaha because they were a little smaller in width and a little stronger. He had to take a bunch of chains apart to make ones the right length. And because you have 3 chains instead of 2 in a very narrow area, he wanted chain guides on the opposite sides of the cylinders, so we found a phenolic plastic that worked pretty good. He made chain guides for everything and got everything to fit in there. And then the chains, the rivet that went through each chain link was somewhat flat on the end, and so we took a Dremel and used a whole bunch of bits with a Dremel. And how long did it take you with the Dremel on the chains? You figure 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah.
He took the rivets and trimmed them all down a little bit, making them a little convex on the end to make a little more room, because he's worried about one chain touching another at 10,000 RPM. If that happens, you might have catastrophic engine failure. Let me see, what else did he have to do? Well, let's see, there's a nice braided steel oil line there. That's probably for drainage off the cylinder head. I believe that's what it's for. He made his own swing arm, hand hammered his own tanks, electric fuel pump, the carbs if you decide to build your own now that you know how he did it. He went, how many pieces in the intake manifolds? 146. It took him a lot of little pieces of aluminum getting them all cut, ground, fitted, welded together, making sure nothing leaks, and then build 6 individual intake manifolds. And I think he said he had 146 pieces of aluminum there. So it's all not that difficult. He built his own frame, everything out of aluminum, a lot of billet there. You might want to take some welding classes and learn how to weld aluminum if you're going to build one. And let me see, can you think of anything else that I need to cover on the building of the CBX? Is there anything? Oh, look at that nice dog. What else did you do? Is there anything you want to touch on in the building of it?
Everything is cool.
Okay, so there it is again. It is. Oh, look at. Now you can see what I look like. Look at that big gut on me. I have a big gut. It's not the reflection and a curvature of an aluminum hand-hammered seat. That thing is so pretty. Anyway, that's how we built it. So now I fully expect the next summer, as I'm driving down the road, I want to see at least a dozen of these bikes running around the streets of America with V12s based on the CBX. I mean, it's not like you can't do it. I'll never build one. She'll never build one. And she's a border collie, and they're noted as being fairly intelligent. In fact, her name is Oreo, and I tested her intelligence. I said, Oreo, Timmy fell down a well. Go to Home Depot and bring back a 16-foot extension ladder to save him. Half an hour later, Oreo comes back from Walmart dragging an 8-foot folding ladder behind her, but I still love her. My wife said maybe Oreo doesn't like Timmy. Anyway, this is the V12, and that's how we built it. When you're ready to build one, you can contact me through my YouTube site and ask me any questions you want, and I'll be more than happy to let you know what he did. I love them little covers. The forks just slide back and forth between the Webers. Those are 3 45 millimeter DCOE Webers. Well, you know how to get a hold of me. You know how to build a CBX. And as far as the ignition goes, you just take 2 ignition units and stack them on top of each other. Where'd it go? There it is. No, right there. And there's just 2 stock ignition units in there. All the coils up here. Ran out of places to put the coils. So, well, good luck building your V12.